Welcome to Great Life Coaching. This is Dragon 6 Golf. I have an interview here with a veteran and a friend. Her name is Janine. And I just want to give a quick story. One of the first times I had experienced the real Janine. Um,
Oh,
so this is, I started working with you. Um, and there was no such like real training that I had to go through for a job. So it's the old-fashioned OJT, on the job training, which we're all familiar with.
yeah,
And I remember I was shadowing you, and you were showing me like the different buildings. You were showing me where things were at, and you would introduce me to people. And you ran into a client. I don't know if he used to be an ex-client of yours or he was a current client. I don't remember. But in order to get his way, he had told somebody that he was going to throw himself in front of the train. So where we
yeah.
worked, there was train tracks like right in front of us, and you had told him like, if you really mean this, then I'm what do you call it, mandatory
Mandated reporter.
mandated reporter, because
Hmm.
not only our degrees, but the type of job we had. And for those of you who don't know, mandated reporters, if you come across somebody who wants to hurt themselves or others, we have to alert the authorities. So when you
Yeah,
told him that, he kind of backed up and was like, "Oh, let me just tell you what I want." So just that little piece that I saw of you, I was like, "Okay, she's serious about her job. She's serious about her morals, and really, this is before I really knew anything about you." So that was my first experience. Do you remember that day?
I do.
You do.
I do. And it
So
was just like stressful and anxious. I remember being on edge every day,
yeah,
honestly,
yeah,
because you're like, okay, not in the unhealthy sense. It was almost weird because it was like, ooh, I wonder what's going to happen today.
yeah. I mean,
But
every
then you're
day
like,
was definitely a different
ooh,
a
right?
different day. We dealt with some characters for sure.
But
So
I just wanted to make sure that it was like uh I it will knowing the job is one thing. I didn't really know the job. I was just trying to, but I know I wanted to be real with every single person that I encountered
yeah.
because of, I felt like that was my respect to them, but I
Hmm.
wasn't going to sugarcoat it, like don't you think? Like we can help them, but we also can, you know, be honest. And I think they deserve that.
Right.
Right. So, yeah, I do remember it. I sure do.
All right. So that's just an intro. That was my introduction to you. Um, so let me ask you. Let's go back to your to little Janine. Where were you born?
I was born at Fort Carson, Colorado, in Colorado Springs, that area.
Yep. I lived there for a couple
Um,
years.
yep, I was an Army brat. Then my parents had just come from Vietnam. I want to say it was 2 years. They arrived back in the US in 1972.
Okay.
And I was born in 74. And I remember my parents making it such a big deal because I was actually born in a Catholic hospital downtown.
Hmm.
My mom's originally Catholic. She converted to Southern Baptist, um, and then, well, because the hospital on post there, my son's saying hi, so I just said anyway through the French doors.
Right.
And uh, they didn't have any space or room in the Army hospital, so they shipped my parents downtown. So, and my dad worked back in the day when they had a recondo school. That's where he went to kind of integrate back into the U.S.
What's Recondo School?
So it's it's not quite ranger school, but it was like not quite jungle school,
Okay.
but it was like a mixture of both. And it was like this concept that they had on it was, I want to say it was Camp Red Devil or something weird. I mean, my dad mentioned it. They don't have it there anymore.
Right.
That I do know. But he went there, and I think because of his 7 years back to back in Vietnam, um, he wanted to do something similar to like being in Vietnam. I mean, I couldn't even imagine trying to reintegrate into society during that time and without the support, you know? And then you're bringing home a Vietnamese bride, and it's like, you know,
Wow.
it's just
So this is in the 70s. Your dad is a Vietnam veteran, obviously. He's retired
mm-hmm,
Army, and he
mm-hmm.
brings home a Vietnamese wife.
Yeah,
And I can imagine in the 70s, politically and how people thought, they were calling them baby killers. My dad's a Vietnam vet
yeah,
too, so
yeah.
he told me about his experience coming back, and it wasn't a welcome. It was
Mm-mm.
definitely hard. So, how did your
My,
mom handle coming here?
oh my mom, oh, she's so awesome. She came from a good family in Vietnam, and
Hmm.
she already spoke English. She spoke French. You know, they were taught that in Vietnam. She's always been humble. Like, even when people were being stupid, she was just like, you know what? That's where I first learned God doesn't like ugly, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
It was like, but she was like, and she still is like a ninja. Like, a
A
lot of
ninja.
people, well, because a lot of people underestimated her and they assumed that she didn't speak the language, but then
Uh,
she turned around and she's like
I speak three
doing all,
languages. Ha.
yeah, I mean, she was just, but she never kind of like, now she did have, you know, she would get crazy. Like I like to tell my kids, don't let me get crazy, but she would get crazy with us, but it was like, she was so prim and proper and classy, and she still is. She's very sweet and humble, and she she does get a little rowdy here and there, but
Of course.
like the way that I raise my kids and how I'm kind of a little harsh. I'm a mean mom, right? I used to always say that. And she would actually yell at me about how mean I was to my kids. And I'm looking at her like, I don't realize you don't remember the chopsticks and the broomsticks. And it's like, oh gosh, but she's a really great, and she was very gracious. She ignored a lot of it, honestly. She didn't. My dad was the one that was like, oh, you know, I'm gonna kick your ass kind of thing. And
Hmm.
and that's the normal response, right? When you love somebody and you feel like they're being
Of
mistreated.
course.
But when my dad came back, he was an E6. He
Hmm.
didn't retire. So he was still doing and then from Fort Carson, we went to Fort Polk
Okay.
because he went to go to be a drill sergeant.
Well.
Back in the day, I guess the training was at Fort Polk.
Yeah.
So, and that was a short stint. And then we went to Fort Benning, Georgia,
Hmm.
where he was a first sergeant there, excuse me, at Kelly Hill, where they did all the infantry stuff, and
Okay. Did he retire
uh,
as an E8 or E9?
E9.
E9. Okay, so he made sergeant major.
Yeah, and he was a command sergeant major, and that's
Okay.
the job he retired out of. So it's funny because, people say, oh, are you a sergeant major? My dad's like, I'm a command sergeant major.
I mean, there is a difference, and I worked
Yeah.
for both. Obviously, sergeant majors are more like staff personnel,
Mm-hmm.
and command sergeant majors, they're the brigade, the battalion sergeant majors.
It's,
They're the ones that
mm-hmm.
command people. So it's like being a first sergeant, being a master or a master
Mm-hmm.
sergeant. Same difference.
Yeah.
A little bit more power, a little bit more respect.
Yeah, for sure. My dad earned it. I always, when I talk about my parents, and just like I did, I remember watching movies like Platoon or Hamburger Hill and
Yeah.
thinking that was my dad's experience, and it wasn't. And so I was like, oh, okay, like, because I know before my parents actually told me their story, it was
Hmm.
like, that was my assumption.
Oh,
I
okay.
remember thinking, back in the day, PTSD, we just talked about Vietnam. We
Yeah.
didn't even talk about shell shock from World War II and,
Right.
well, actually World War One.
Hmm.
And I just remember thinking, man, I wonder, I wonder when that's going to occur in my dad, and kind of being like, not knowing how PTS or PTSD, whatever the proper saying of it is, like how it manifests.
Okay.
So
Do you remember? Did your dad have any friends that committed suicide after coming back from Vietnam?
I don't, I don't think so, because his story was different. He worked with the South Vietnamese army and the Montagnard soldiers, who were like hardcore. They were. I remember my dad telling me stories about the ones he worked with in the Montagnard,
Hmm.
and he used to he used to say, I I gave them I gave them their income, I paid for their weapons, I gave them their food, I gave them their beans and bullets kind of thing.
Yeah.
But he said, but I was supposed to be in charge of them, but he said they trained him more than they ever that they trained my dad more than that he ever trained them.
Yeah. Kind of makes sense because they know the land. They know you
Hmm.
know, they know where the enemy could be. They had so much knowledge of their area.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's their home. And so even knowing their enemies and Sun Tzu, and they did invest time in reading about all that, and
Yeah.
folk stories and stuff like that. So, but
So
yeah, I'll go ahead.
I was gonna ask. So, you know, where when you were in high school, where did you live? Where did you finish
Hmm.
out your high school?
So ninth grade year, okay, we moved back to the U.S.
Hmm.
from Germany. Um, I went, am I trying to think? Yeah, it was I went to a school initially in Corona, California,
Oh, okay.
and then my parents ended up buying a house not too far away in Riverside, which is about 15 more miles going east
Hmm.
from LA. And um, so I went for 3 months at Centennial High School in Corona, California, and then I went to Riverside, California. But this is where my memory is kind of even horrible at 47. I'm so sad. I did do 1 year of high school in Northern California, where my dad was stationed, his last duty station at Fort Ord, California. And I went to Seaside High School, um, which was where all the dependent kids went that
Okay.
lived on Fort Ord. But because I was a swimmer and I wanted a better swim team, I went to Monterey High School in Monterey,
Hmm.
California. And I remember having to get up and get myself, up and take the city bus, because my parents did help me get transferred, and they justified it because of the sports, but they couldn't provide me transportation. So it was actually good training, because I had to wake myself up. I
Yeah.
had to wake up, get ready, take the city bus, go to swim practice. in the morning, and then swim practice in the afternoon. And then my mom would come pick me up. And I went half a semester till swim season was over, and then I went back to Seaside High, which they referred to it as the ghetto high school. But it was a tough environment because, you got a bunch of military kids there.
Oh yeah.
And they were, they could be a little rough. So
Yeah.
and then once my dad retired, then I went to Southern California and went to those two others. So I went to a total of 4 high schools,
Okay.
quite honestly.
So
And
so you kind of sounds like you moved around quite a bit because obviously you're a military brat, and
mhm,
after graduation, how soon did you go to college?
I actually started summer school. I knew I couldn't go to a university. I wasn't really a good student.
Okay.
I really wasn't. And I could have been, but I just, priorities.
Yeah.
And I went to junior college for summer school that summer.
Okay.
I knew, and at that time, my parents didn't have the money to send me to school. So I got a job.
Hmm.
And back 1992, it was $13 a credit.
Okay.
And so I paid for it myself. And I had pride in that because I actually was paying for it, right? So
So
that's when
crazy how much school has increased since the
I know.
90s.
It's so
That's
sad. Oh, you know what? It was in Riverside, California,
hmm.
Riverside Community College. It actually was free.
Okay.
And then they were like, well, now we're charging $13 a credit. And I
I
was
bet
like,
you that
oh
was a shocker to
gosh,
some people. Yeah.
I know. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to pay for my school because I felt like I wanted to, my parents felt bad because they couldn't
Yeah.
get me into school, but I think it was the greatest thing that ever I did for myself was pay for my school
Right.
and actually apply myself.
Okay. Because if you
And
fail, it's your money.
yeah, it's my money. And so
Yeah.
I started right away. I don't know why. I wasn't like a big partier by then. I realized I was in control of my future.
Okay.
And whereas, I didn't have that control before.
Right. Right.
So
So at what point did you? Uh, so I know you went through ROTC.
mhm.
When and what school did that happen at?
I was at Cal State University in San Bernardino, and I was almost graduated. Actually, I only had 1 year to go, but I saw these cadets, these
Hmm.
Army people rappelling off of the library building. It was like a 8 or 10 story building,
Uh huh.
right? And I think because I was an Army brat and I was used to moving around so much, and I hadn't since I moved to Riverside
Yeah.
as I guess, sophomore. Um, I was just I had that itch like, oh man, it's time to move, And so I saw them and I was like, huh, what do you know? That's exciting. What are they doing?
Yeah.
And so I asked and inquired about it. But like about a couple months prior to that, I met my friend that I had from high school. She taught. I saw her and I was like, hey, we went to the same college and everything.
Hmm.
She's like, oh, I just got back from the Peace Corps, serving for a year. I was in Africa, and it was awesome. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, tell me more. Cause,
Hmm.
I was in the mood of like moving, and I came home. I remember going home and telling my dad, I was like, I'm going to join the Peace Corps. Don't worry. I'll still finish college,
Uh
but
huh.
I'm going to go join the Peace Corps. My dad's like, oh, please just just please one more year. I was like, no, I'll come back and I'll finish. And so I was still thinking about it at that point, but I knew I had the itch. And then I saw them doing ROTC and rappelling off the library. So I felt like that replaced that new thing that I needed.
Right.
And so I signed up, and I was a hot mess. Oh my gosh, drill and ceremony. I was like, my friend, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know about this. But
Right.
so
what year did you graduate, and what degree did you get?
I graduated, and because I signed on so late, like, because you're supposed to usually have like 2 more years left.
Yeah.
I decided that I would still sign up. And by then, my dad found out that because of his VA rating, and in the state of California, if you have, I think it was 40% or higher, your dependent children can go to a state school for free.
Nice.
Through tuition assistance. So that kind of saved me, because I was chasing after like scholarships. I went to they called it, it was basic camp. It wasn't basic training. And it was for all these college kids that needed to get some college money. And I went to that thing and I competed, and I actually got a scholarship out of it.
Oh, cool.
And simultaneously found out about the tuition assistance thing. So I opted to do the TA thing. Instead of taking the scholarship, because I still was kind of not sure if I wanted to go active duty or reserves.
Okay.
And I didn't want to commit myself completely. Okay. So I was able to get that. And then I signed a 2-year contract, which meant I stayed in school another year. And I ended up graduating in March of 1998.
Okay.
And with a degree in healthcare administration.
Okay.
And I was branched medical service corps.
Okay. I'm not very familiar with how it works for ROTC. So when you graduate, and is it when you get your commission, is that when you find out what branch of the Army you're going into, or how does that work?
So first you do your commission, and then you go through a sessions, I think. Or it might be simultaneous. Like all I remember is that because I graduated in March and it wasn't a traditional, June summer graduation.
Right.
I had a little bit more time, but I think it was simultaneous. I want to say you find out what your sessions, from because you have your wish list.
Sure.
And I put in medical service corps first because they had healthcare administrators, and I remember the Army was adopting managed care, the managed care model. And so I was real deliberate in my sessions or my packet, because I was like, medical service corps, military intelligence, and aviation, I was told during that time that I commissioned, were the hardest branches to get. You had to be.
Wait, you almost got chosen for aviation?
Oh, no. It's just when you want aviation, when you want military intelligence or medical service, those are the hardest ones to get in. So you have to have decent scores.
Okay, I see.
From your advanced camp, it's between your junior and senior year, you go to this advanced camp where you compete. And Ricky will never stop giving me shit about it, because it's like advanced camp,
For y'all, Ricky's her husband.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, it's okay. We'll get into him in the timeline later on.
So, I'm sorry if you might have to bleep my minor cuss words.
Cursing's allowed. We're veterans.
Okay. All right.
We shouldn't be getting offended by cuss words by now.
No, I don't want. I follow rules to a certain extent.
Hey,
but
my target audience are veterans. I could care less what everybody else says. Sorry to
Hell
say it, but
yeah. Hell yeah. That's right. So, um, so yeah, I didn't do well at advanced camp though.
you didn't.
I was
Okay.
average. You know, I
What's
went
advanced
there.
camp?
Oh my
Explain for us
gosh.
dummies.
That one time at band camp, I mean, like, I'm
That's
sorry.
what you make it sound like. Like
Well,
you didn't
back
play
in
the
my
flute, did you?
day, it was, 1997
Uh huh.
ish, because you go before in between your junior and senior year. Mine was at Fort Lewis, Washington. So back in the day, they used to have it camp at either Fort Lewis or I think at Fort Bragg.
Okay.
And
Those are two
that's
good
when I
places to have camp. Yeah.
first heard about don't ever go to Fort Bragg. I mean, I remember that. And I was
Uh
like, oh
huh.
my God. And then I went to Lewis, and you go for like 6 or 8 weeks, I forget.
Mm-hmm.
And you go there and you're assigned to leadership positions, and they've got like folks that are grading you from the cadre.
Okay.
And so you learn, your learning occurred at your school, but
Mm-hmm.
when you were there, you were kind of like in the situation. And
What? Who's the cadre? Is it active duty people or
mhm, it was a
enlisted or officer?
combination, both,
Oh,
a
both. Okay.
combination. So we had a platoon sergeant, an actual platoon sergeant. We had a platoon leader
Uh huh.
that was a second lieutenant, and then we had the other cadre that were there to supervise overall operations. So we had this really cool butter bar dude who, I think about it now, and we were all thinking, oh my gosh, that guy's so cool, because he's a freaking butter bar, and we're like little cadets, and then we had this female captain. I don't remember what branch she was, but she was mean, but she was country.
Uh
She
huh.
was she was some country bunk mean lady. And then our platoon sergeant was awesome. He was real cool, calm, collected, but don't piss him off or else you're dead. And I
So
mean, I want to say he was like Vietnam era
yeah, yeah.
going in. Yeah.
I remember in the '90s because I came in '94 and we
Hmm.
still have Vietnam vets. My first duty station at Fort Hood, my very first sergeant was a Vietnam vet with missing fingers. He had
Yeah.
these two fingers missing, so when he would salute, it'd be like this. He was the big dude, man. He was so tall. He was scary. We were all like, we had no idea how he lost his fingers, and he would never tell anybody.
Uh-huh.
But we made up all sorts of stuff, and
I
so
know.
it's funny because we came in at the tail end where the Vietnam vets were retiring. So definitely
Hmm.
okay.
Yeah, I do. I do remember, and he was real cool, and he. I remember watching the interaction between him and the captain,
Hmm.
and realizing that a lot of the NCOs would be like, "Okay, step aside. We'll come and see you and get a signature when we need it, but otherwise, just go over there. Just go
Okay.
in the corner."
Yeah.
And I was just like, whoa, this is awesome. But I was stressed out the most about the physical fitness, like running in formation, and
Uh-huh.
which I was fine. That was something I was just the most stressed about, um, because I didn't feel like I was prepared, but I felt like the unit, the ROTC cadre at my school, they totally prepared us. I was the only female for quite some time
Out
in
of how
my,
many?
I mean, like at Cal State San Bernardino, it was a small school back then.
Okay.
Um, it, I, I could say that the majority of the cadets, which was probably about 50,
So you're
like
like 1 out of 50?
at my school
Yeah.
alone, yeah, like, well, maybe 1 out of 35 ish,
Okay.
but all of them were prior enlisted. Like,
Uh,
we had prior enlisted tankers. Our ROTC instructor, he was a tanker.
mm-hmm.
Really great guy. Still keep in touch with him to this day.
Cool.
And infantry, a lot of infantry. I mean, a couple MPs, I think, but the majority of the unit was like prior enlisted. And even though we were a smaller school, which wasn't as prestigious, like,
Sure.
it wasn't UCLA or anything, we had the smartest people there. And that's what helped me get trained up. And
So you feel like you were better prepared for the real deal?
yeah,
Okay. All right.
because of the NCOs around me
Mm-hmm.
were prior enlisted, and we had this guy who was our NCO. This guy came straight from 3rd Ranger Battalion. He was in
Oh, okay.
Grenada. He was mean as shit, and but
Sound like he had a chip on his shoulder.
I don't. Well, back then, I think definitely he had some remnants of PTSD
Okay.
and anger.
Mm-hmm.
For real, like he was dealing with cadets. I mean, it's like, get real, we're just cadets. But because a lot of them were prior enlisted, though, actually he did do a good job. It was just like, I used to cry really easily.
Uh-huh.
I know it's hard to believe, but
It is.
he made me really tough. Like, I mean, he was just like, there's no crying in baseball.
Right.
Like,
Right.
he's like, you will not. And I was like, okay, all right. And I mean, um,
But would you say he cared?
I think he did.
You
I
think?
think
Okay.
I know that our OIC, who is also prior enlisted before he became an officer,
Mm-hmm.
now I know he cared. I really respected him, and it was just great demonstrations of leadership from the beginning, right there at college. In all honesty, and then so I was branched medical service corps, which I was so happy because I just felt like if I'm going to join the Army, I know managed care.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a healthcare administrator. I know I can help make a difference with the Army transitioning their military hospitals to managed care. And so,
So where'd you go for your uh, army training for on the medical side for your branch of service?
so I went to Fort Sam Houston. That's
Right.
the Army Medical Department.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer the Army Medical Department, but I landed at Fort Sam in July of 1998, and um, went through my training. I mean, it was more like college. It was a joke. I think I learned a couple things, but I think it was, it was like, for me, because of my background, like being in an Asian household, it was like, woohoo, freedom, like, um, it was hot as shit. That's what I do remember. Because coming from California, I mean, dry heat, Riverside, kind
Uh-huh.
of desert, humid heat. Oh, hell no. It was like, I struggled with running. I mean, it was like
Yeah.
pretty bad. And then
How long were you at Fort Sam?
till September, the end of September. And while we were there, so we get our first assignment, like eventually you get it. And I remember putting these outlandish locations, like anywhere overseas, and Germany, of course, because I grew up there. And they gave me Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And I was
Oh,
like, what the
land of the
hell?
cops, right? That's where the MPs train, right?
I was going to go to the combat support hospital there.
Uh-huh.
I heard, oh my God, I cannot believe I can't remember. But at Fort Campbell, I was going to go to their combat support hospital, um, and I was like, I'm joining the Army to go see the world. Like, I don't want to go to, I've been to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. It's like, I don't
Yeah.
want to go there again.
Yeah.
So this girl, one of these girls in my class, she was like crying, and when we got all our assignments, because we
Right.
kind of got them in a room, and she's crying. I was like, what's going on? And she's like, oh, I'm going to Korea, and my boyfriend's being stationed here stateside. And I was
Oh,
like, oh,
jeez.
you're going to Korea? I was like, well, shoot,
Sign
let's
me
trade.
up.
I was like, let's trade. I went and I said, hey, can we switch if we're not happy with? And they were like, oh yeah, you can switch. So I took her Korea and she took my Campbell, and
Nice.
and I was excited. I mean, that was another place people told me to avoid, Fort Bragg and Korea. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go find out for myself.
Well,
I'm not.
I never went to Korea. My wife went to Korea, and she said
Mhm.
that's good for single people.
Yeah, shoot. I was single. I was crazy. I was ready. And I remember calling my parents, and they were like, my mom, she's from Vietnam originally,
Uh-huh.
and so all of her daughters, I have three sisters, and they're all here, and she was like, she was already kind of mad at my dad because I joined the military, but then she was really mad when I said, oh, I'm going to Korea. And she's like, oh my gosh, like, ah. And, but I realized back then I needed to get away. It was like I was running away
Mm-hmm.
because I had this, my mom and I joke about it now, but have you ever seen the movie Joy Luck Club?
Yes.
Okay. So kind of a funny joke, because the moms all deal with their daughters and they act like it's their fault if their daughters don't do whatever they say, or it's like
Right.
whatever they do or don't do, it's all my fault. And so I was like, Mom, I love you, but um, don't get Joy Luck Club on me. That's like our saying. I was like, don't get all Joy Luck Club on me. It's going to be fine. Let me experience my life.
Right.
I know, because I know deep down she just wanted to protect me.
Of
And
course.
it took me a long time to realize that, though, because I was always like, run away, run away. And
Well,
so
who
I
says
did.
being in military training was more relaxing than being at home?
Uh-uh. No, I mean, but when I arrived, from the very beginning of arriving in Korea, I had the time of my life. And I really felt like it was my attitude first.
Okay.
Because I started to learn a lot of things about myself. Like I was scared. I mean, first time away, um, being very sheltered as a young lady. And I going halfway around the world was really what helped me, and I realized I was behind the power curve too.
Right.
Like when I see my friends who grew up with a little bit tougher childhoods or whatever, it makes me grateful that I had, the opportunities, but I think it also kept me from doing things too that I
Sure.
should have already known. So anyway, I was thrown into that,
So you,
and
you go to Korea. Where in Korea did you end up? And
I
how
went
long
to
were you there?
I went to Daegu, which they apparently called Hollywood, and I. But I also was ambitious, and I thought everyone talked about second ID versus being down in the South,
Mm-hmm.
and I was preparing myself for the worst. Like I was preparing myself for going to second ID and having crappy
Sure.
um, a military experience, but
Right.
I ended up going to Tegu. Um, it was awesome. When I arrived, um, I arrived kind of relatively early in October.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had some time to, to snowbird and just get ready. And I was able to live off post.
Okay.
Um,
Why was that?
and
Is it they had too many people there, or?
they didn't have enough room or
Oh,
something because they
okay.
were putting people in the Korean Air Base barracks, which were like no bueno.
Right.
But
Right.
I happened to come in at a time where they said, okay, here's your statement of non-availability. Go find yourself a place. So I stayed in like the BOQ for a little bit. And then I answered an ad in the PX,
Uh-huh.
and it was for an apartment it was actually in a house. It was the second level apartment, and it was awesome. I mean, I had balconies. I
Mm-hmm.
had I had plenty of space. I had two bedrooms, but I converted one of the bedrooms into like a dining room off the kitchen so that we could have a place to sit. And, back then you get household goods through the military. They bring you a table and a couch. And I remember my landlord
They
being
furnished
so,
your apartment.
yeah, they
Oh
furnished
wow.
my apartment. And I remember my landlord being like amazed because
Right.
they also brought me a fridge. And I
Like the
remember I
little
had,
ones, like that big, or
no, it was a regular size fridge
what?
in Korea. And I had my back entrance. So like you come into, it's a gated, there's a beautiful gated courtyard.
Uh huh.
So I'd get in the secure gate and then I'd walk towards the left side of the house to go to the back because I had my own steps to go to my house. And I remember watching this Korean man
Mm-hmm.
strap that damn fridge on the back of his back, and he carried that sucker all the way upstairs. And I'm like on pins and needles, like, oh my gosh, she's gonna die, like. And they bring all this stuff in, and my landlord's like, oh, this is neat. And I was like, yeah, I didn't know. I was like, this is neat. I mean, I so it was, but all my other friends, except for one other, Adrian, who, by the way, went to OCS with Ricky. That's another story, but um, her and I were able to live off post. Everybody else had to stay in K2 or K16. I forget which one, but it's near Taegu. And they were in the barracks. They were like, this sucks. And
So
so they'd all,
also, there's a money difference too, right? Because you were receiving BAH at this point.
yes. And so so Suki is her name.
Mm-hmm.
She actually went to Ohio State University. She's a nurse. And so she put in the ad because her dad passed away. And so she came back to Korea to be with her mom because she's an only child. And she, she put the ad in, but she wasn't a part of the network where all the Korean landlords knew how much to charge, the max amount of BAH.
Right. Right.
Suki didn't know. So I was charged like 100 or 200 won
Oh, you were
less.
banking.
I was banking because then I had money to buy the kerosene
Uh huh.
that they put into the side of the house to heat the floors.
Right.
So I had
Okay.
heated floors, right? And that's why my forever home will have heated floors, even in the bathroom, even in Texas. I don't care. It'll be like 2 months out of the year where I could use my heated floors. But
Wow.
um,
So this time in Korea, this is where you also met Ricky.
mhm,
Okay.
yeah. Oh man.
Nah, he. We'll talk about him maybe in another podcast because I want to make this about you. So for those who don't know, Ricky eventually becomes her husband, but from what I
Mhm,
remember, y'all didn't quite get along well at first, right?
mm-mm.
Okay. So,
No, he's
so
too. Mm-mm.
when after you met Ricky, when did y'all marry? How long was it before you married?
Um, we were engaged for 2 years.
Okay.
So we met October. He knows the exact date apparently, but it was like the end of October, and we were at the newcomers brief.
Okay.
And then, but we didn't. So like from that point to where we actually started dating was a few months. It wasn't immediate. And
Okay.
but anyway, when it happened, I mean, it was basically like 2 years after we were engaged because I was going to go to Fort Carson. That was going to be my follow-on assignment, my reward for going to Korea and doing the hard assignment. And ironically, he had follow-on orders to Fort Carson as well.
Okay.
Before we ever met each other. But when we got engaged, he was like, "Oh, can we go to Fort Bragg? Because, I want to go to this unit." And I was like, "Dude, that's the place that they said avoid like the damn plague." And here I am. And I'm like, well, at first I wasn't going to change it because I was like, this has been my dream thing since I was a kid. I wanted to go back to Fort Carson.
Yeah, well, Colorado Springs is like the place a lot of people want to go, not only in the Army, but in the Air Force too, yeah.
And I wanted to kind of go back and see the places that the hospital I was born in, the house that my parents had bought when they came to Vietnam. But
so ended up going to Fort Bragg.
I ended up going to Fort Bragg, like a weirdo. And I remember he was going to a school, I think it was maybe rigor school or some sort of school where I had to report by myself. And I'm driving around. I think in between I took some leave and went home, but I go to Fort Bragg. I'm driving around and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've stepped back in time. I'm going through a time warp because this place is like bad. And so, remembering the things that when you're young, you think are, the things you want to do, or, like malls were important and stupid shit like that. Right. Yeah. I was like, oh my gosh, the mall's like our version of a mini mall in California. I'm like, oh my God, this is bad. But I hated it.
Right.
I went to 28th Cash. And by then I decided, I was going to go to an additional skill identifier school, which was to be a PAD officer, a patient admin officer. And so I took the PAD position at the cash, and I mean, I hated it. It was awful. I mean, not only that, it's because I didn't arrive with airborne wings and I didn't have
They look at you. I remember back then you go to units like that, they looked at your tabs and, they want to see what you got on.
Your badges were what they thought were competence.
Yeah.
And I didn't have my expert field medical badge yet. And so it was a, I look back now and I think I'm so glad I did it because, again, I learned so much and I felt the pressure to, like, I was reading all of our FM manuals, our AR regulations. I mean, like, I was learning that shit, upside down, right side up. I was learning it. And medical operations, even though I wanted to be a PAD officer, I felt like medical operations or having that background made me a stronger PAD officer because I knew operationally what I was, when you're dealing with deployments or when you're trying to, like in a combat support hospital, if you know the whole common operating picture, it makes you a better PAD officer, especially when you're dealing with patient evacuation, and you're dealing with, like, back then we had our own medevac helicopters, which we worked very closely with. So, but it was hard. It was hard, and you had to learn so quickly. But I realized I learned quickly. I did. I had that pressure. And then the other thing was the physical aspect of being at Fort Bragg, because you have to run and do 18th Airborne Corps standards. So you're not just running with your unit, you're having to do a quarterly run 4 miles in 36 minutes. And then you had to do a 12K or 20K ruck march in 3 hours or whatever. So that additional, like, when you're young, you don't feel it.
Right.
But you're just tearing your body up. And so when I later on worked at Office of the Surgeon General, like, and I was working with the IDES process, the Integrated Disability Evaluation System, which is the VA's version, but medical boards,
Right.
you know, are on the Army side. It was just like, well, no shit. Like, you know, a lot of people are going to be broken and have these, you know, these things that come and bite you later on in life.
Not to cut you off, but that brings up something that we have in the military. Well, I know for the Army for sure, but we never want to admit that we're hurt. We never go to sick call unless we're forced to. And if you do go to sick call, you're begging not to be on quarters. You're begging not to get a profile. You know, and then the bad thing about that, though, nothing gets recorded. So you go to a med board, or you get out and you go to a VA facility and you get your stuff updated. There's no proof, because we're kind of like, number one, we don't want to let our peers down, you know, and then number two, we don't want to look, at least in my field, we didn't want to look like we're weak, and they would literally call us broke dicks. Like, what are we good for? We're just broke.
Well, I think the stigma that's where I realized the stigma with when a person wants to take care of themselves. There was a stigma and a label that was given to them. Now, I believe, being in the medical realm, that you can, I mean, I remember taking leave just to go to the doctor and thinking how stupid this is. Because as leaders, we need to be the example.
Sure.
So you know, it's not to say, in my mind, it's not to say you're weak. It's just you have to take care of yourself. If you're not, you know, by being a good leader is by taking care of yourself. And I remember working at Madigan Army Medical Center. It was my first hospital job. And that's when I was having some rough patches with myself. I can remember dating back, like, knowing that I needed somebody to talk to.
Right.
And so and this was how I did it, though, but I still did it. I just didn't officially go down to the psych ward and say, okay. Sure. But from previous duty stations, you know, you meet people and you see people and you're like, oh, you connect. And so I remember working with a doctor in Korea who is stationed now at Madigan. He was a family practice doctor. And he was a great, great guy. And I remember seeing him in the hallway and we were talking, and I even said, well, do you think it's okay if I come and talk to you, like, about old times? I would say, oh, you know, about old times. But then, you know, he was like, sure, come on down. And you know, just to kind of get away, I would go and speak to him and friends. So that's also something I realized too, is talk therapy is good when you can be with a friend who's a friend, who's not just an acquaintance, but an actual friend that you can talk to, that's a safe environment where you can just talk. And
you know, I never had any leadership till about 2003. His name was Major Capella. and he wasn't
Mhm.
even my first line. He was my supervisor, and
Mhm.
he would come in because by this time I had switched over to supply, and
Mhm.
um, I was also the arms room guy, the unit armor. And anytime we had modifications to do to the weapons, he would ask me personally. He'd be like, "Can I help you?" Because as an officer, he never had an opportunity to get that technical skill.
Mhm.
And so every time I had a mod, I'm like, well, let me go call Major Capella, and he would come by, and no matter what he was busy doing, he would always come by, and he would want to learn, and I would teach him and all that.
Mhm.
And he was the first guy because by that time I had been deployed a couple of times already, and
Mhm.
he had never deployed, so he started asking questions, and then I realized this guy is like, I'm talking to him and I'm getting better because I'm expressing myself to a
Mhm.
guy that I know only respected, but he treated like a friend. So it's a
Mhm.
shame that I went all those years from '95 all the way to 2003 without a leader to actually, obviously they cared about me, but they never like talked.
Yeah, there was no personable kind of interaction,
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
And in the medical realm, I used to joke and say like, "Oh, a lot of us are civilians in uniform because we would not talk all the time, but we would interact.
Sure.
We were just it's different, right? In the combat arms realm, you got to be rough and tough,
Yeah.
and
Is it
but I
really though?
also
I mean, do we
no,
always have to be rough and tough? I don't think so.
I I used to remember, you know, thinking, okay, combat arms, combat support, combat service
Service
support.
support, right?
Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And so we were obviously combat service support, but I remember seeing individuals that were in the combat arms realm and thinking, man, they're mean or they're unhappy. And my goal was actually to interact with them and get a softer side of them.
Right.
It's, that was my kind of thing that I was like, I know this person isn't the biggest asshole that he is displaying, but he feels like he has to. And and that's the thing is you're a product of your environment. And so for me, going back to working at Madigan, I had the twins.
Mm-hmm.
Ricky was in first the BSB and then the Ranger Battalion. There was a lot of stress. It was like we didn't talk about it. We already knew it was there.
Yeah.
Um, but it stressed us out to talk about it because we were young and we didn't know how to express it or, appropriately where it was healthy.
Right.
And so I remember internalizing a lot and then with the twins, and having kids, like you don't get a damn manual. And I I did one day say, oh, I'm going to go talk to Dr. So and so, so I won't kill anybody, or I was
Right.
just like, this is my I referred to it back then as my mental health break,
Yeah.
right? And so I put it out there. I didn't act like secretive about it. I felt like I had to be the example
Mm-hmm.
to foster a healthier environment about, saying, yeah, we all have our A game, but we have some off days and I'm
Of course.
human. And but back then, yeah, I mean, it was just like, but I also didn't have the stressor of having to provide, like Ricky and I agreed that I would go off active duty to stay at home with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of like, I really don't care what you think. I got to get right for my kids
Yeah. I
and for
mean
my own
that's
home.
important though. It's like I wish I learned that many years ago because um, after my first couple deployments, admittedly, I was a stone cold statue.
Yeah. Hmm.
Nothing. I remember my ex-wife one time she fell down the stairs and she was like kind of hurt, not bad, but I just kind of walked down and was like, "What are you doing? Come on, get up." Who does that?
Yeah.
Who does that?
Yeah.
Just like,
Yeah.
but like you said, We have a certain mentality, but so let when you went to Afghanistan, were you in the reserves at the time?
No,
You were
I
still
was,
active duty.
well, I have a real, weird, um, so I was active duty from 1998. I got out after my company command
Hmm.
in 2005, stayed at home with the kids. And then I was happy. I got into a reserve job right at Madigan, working in national disaster medical systems. It was
Uh-huh.
awesome. I could grow into, I was a captain at the time, but I could grow into a position all the way up to lieutenant colonel.
Nice.
I was like, hey, I'm good to go. And I'm in
Right.
MedCom. So MedCom, that position was non-deployable.
Okay.
So I was like, shit, I'm good to go.
Yeah.
And then in 2009, and we had already moved from Fort Lewis to back to Bragg, I get this like 2-line email, and it was like, uh, we've reviewed your file, to bring you back on active duty. And now I learned while I was in the reserves that there was people besides your 2 weeks a year annual training and your weekend warrior weekends, whatever. That's all I did. That's all I could do, to be
Right.
honest. I had to coordinate everything with Rick and his schedule and my parents or whatever. Um, and they said, we're basically looking at you to bring you back. And I emailed back and I said, oh, well, I think you've been mistaken. I didn't submit a packet
Oh.
like they do
Uh-huh.
on reserves to go active duty. So the guy, I remember his first name, and I actually worked with him when I went back on active duty, but he was like, oh no, it's needs of the Army. We need more 70 echoes. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, I'm in panic mode
Yeah.
because do I say no and then be on some blacklist forever?
Oh
Like, you
yeah.
just don't,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? I was really like, ooh, how do I handle this? And I called Rick right away and I was like, oh my gosh, this happened. He got mad at me and he thought I put in the packet.
Oh.
And that was another stressor because I was
I
like,
bet.
let me bitch slap you for a second. I don't want this. Because I had transferred from Madigan to Walter Reed, the old Walter Reed. And I was loving my job. Like, it was the best thing. I had annual conferences. I mean, shit, I was going to Orlando, Florida, and Vegas for my damn conferences. I was like, why would I screw something like that up? But
Uh-huh.
it was needs of the Army. And I was already at Bragg, and nobody wants to go to Bragg. So I was able to go back to my unit, 44th Medical Brigade, which
Hmm.
was what 20th Cash is under. And this time I arrived as a medical regulating officer.
What's that?
And well, in the pad world, when you're deployed, you regulate patients. So like if a service member gets hurt on the battlefield, either Iraq or Afghanistan, you do the tactical level, which is the medevac helicopter,
Okay.
you're calling the 9 line. But if they need a higher level of care and they're going to exceed 7 days of getting that care and going back, return to duty, it's a requirement that they have to go back to Launchstool. They have to go outside the theater, the
Okay.
theater of operation. So you work with the Air Force
Hmm.
and you work with the gray tail. The gray tails are the aircraft, the Air Force aircraft, and you coordinate movement from theater to the back to the echelon of care, level which would be launch stool. So like if they were a CCAT or if they were critical care, like they were blown up,
Right.
that's part of the process. You work
Yep.
closely with the Air Force and um, learning all of their Air Force instructions or like their Army version of the Army regulations I had
Hmm.
to do because you had to package patients not only do you package them the way that the Army packages them, patients to move, you have to do all of the proper documentation according to the Air Force, because you're moving it on you're hitching a ride
Right.
with them. And so, yeah, I learned that I was not only being put back on active duty, but oh, by the way, you're deploying. And so that was another huge stressor in our marriage, because he was in some unit that, and I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, we're both going to be deployed together, which we were.
So you were deployed at the same time?
Yeah, he went in February of 2011.
Mm-hmm.
I went in March of 2011, and he only does about 100-day deployments,
Mm-hmm.
shorter deployments. And so we were there together till May. And then he moved back, or he went back. And
How long
and
were
then
you in Afghanistan?
for 1 year.
You did the regular Army type of 1 year deployment.
Yeah.
And because of Rick's job, he gets 100 days.
Yeah, if that.
Yeah.
He stayed as long as he could.
Right.
And the cool thing is his best friend, who he served with in the Ranger Regiment, was there as a contractor, and he repaired all the weapons that those guys would, need repair. And he arranged for Rick and I to be in a room on his little compound that he had.
Cool. Which
was so sweet, right? Because then we were able to be together.
Good to have friends.
Yeah, and my leadership was reluctant, but they allowed it for me to be with him. And then when he left, I still stayed with his best friend for another month or two. And then once he left, then I went back to being with my unit, which, but while, a lot of interesting things happened while we were there. At least, bin Laden was killed. They had the extortion mission that happened. That was devastating. And so I think, and he wasn't with me, and that was another hard time for me, because I had mommy guilt really bad.
Yeah, I can see.
Even though my parents fell in on my household in North Carolina, it was just, I just couldn't get over the whole mommy guilt. And even when I went home in October, I waited as long as I could, let everybody else go on R&R. I went back in October, and my daughter was like a different person. Yeah. She was, I wanted to raise a lady, and I came back, she's burping at the table, and, just, and so when Rick came back, my parents were like, hey, we can stick around, we can help you, and Rick was like adamant, like, nope, I'm good, I got this, I can do the single dad thing. And he did the best he could, I remember
he's a
my
dad,
parents
man. We can only do so much.
Well, he had his pride too. He was like, no, you can do this. And he did, and he did a good job. But I came back and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to
you got
teach
some
her
training to do at home.
Son, not so much, our son was diagnosed with autism when he was 4. And we did so much intervention and therapies, and I'm grateful for all of that, but I still had mommy guilt, and I have, I have control issues.
Right.
I think a lot of moms, we do, and I don't think there's nothing wrong with it as long as it's not unhealthy. But I've had to learn how to kind of let go of a lot of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
which is very hard. And mommyhood was one of those things that really taught me so much, and it's still teaching me. But I I had to let go of a lot of things that I felt like, oh, we have to have the kids a certain way, and they have, yes, you have to be respectful,
Yes.
but I don't want to project any social norms, what we thought were social norms on them, because I also want them to change the world in a good way and not put limitations on them or complete control. Like, I eventually was like, okay, life, limb, or eyesight, mommy's definitely getting involved. But if they're going to fail, if they're going to fall on their face, I realized that those were the best lessons that I could allow. But it's scary as a mom or dad to do that.
Yeah.
Like with Layla, she's young, and, you want to mold her a certain way, but you also want her to, find out things on her own so that she's within reason. It's not, again, life, limb, or eyesight, that it's not going to hurt her.
Right.
Because I think back of like how much I was sheltered as a child and as a teenager, and how it hurt me as an adult. So I wanted my kids to experience those things up front and have them understand that, the world is not completely nice. You
That's for
know,
sure.
you can be a good example, especially with all this, the turmoil that's going on in the country. You have to be the example, and not to say that you're going to allow this stuff to happen to you. I've already encountered people that have talked to me or wanted to project things on me, and I had to kind of respectfully say, well, let's agree to disagree. And
Hopefully, I'm
civil
not one of those
discourse,
people.
no, civil discourse still occurs.
Yeah,
You
definitely.
know, it's just like when we were working as a team, you, me, and the Johns, and we agreed to disagree. But 5 minutes later, it's like, all right, shithead, let's go to lunch,
Yeah, yeah.
or whatever. And we
Save
have to
that
be
story. Save that story.
okay.
So let's get back on track. So we're talking about Afghanistan. You were there for a year. Now, since you're dealing with Kazivacs, which I'm assuming also includes fatalities, um, how do you think that has either changed you, or was it an experience that you were glad you had? Tell me a little bit more about that part of your job.
Well, I'm so glad it happened. I'm so fortunate for the experiences, because you see the scarier parts, the 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 casualties of war, if you will, and then you see the brotherhood and sisterhood come together and make things happen for the mission. I think what we didn't do a good job of is the debriefing that probably should have occurred and staying on top of that, because of the mentality and the of being strong. You got to, you can't show weakness. You can't show that you're having a minute. Like, I remember going back to my bee hut and or my hut and just kind of crying it out and saying, oh my gosh. I mean, it wasn't always just crying because you were sad. You were crying because you were like, this made me so proud. Or
Okay.
I love, like, as a female, speaking as a female, even in the combat service support world, I always felt like you have that bond with the people that you deploy with
Yeah.
forever,
Yeah.
forever. And I couldn't even imagine what it's like to be on some remote fob where you're really struggling to live
Right.
or die, you know. And so I I think though it's so important to talk about stuff, and not in a cheesy way, but to say, come on, let's talk. Let's go to a place, you know, that you don't even have to talk. Sometimes you can cry it out, or you can just listen.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, you have to allow that to occur, because it's weird. It's awkward after everything's cleaned up, or, you know, like
Yeah.
from that environment, you're like, oh my gosh, you're still wailing and you're kind of pinging from it. And but I think we just didn't do a good job of like talking about it. And I think the chaplain's support was awesome, you know, but it, you know, it wasn't always. And the combat, we have the combat operational stress control. A lot of them were reserved for the units that were out in those remote locations. We didn't have anything for the actual medical people to deal with. And think about it, like I have a friend who's a good friend of mine, and she was a medic in the Ford surgical team, and they saw a lot more shit. You know, they were the ones that were closest to the battlefield, or, you know, where we would send the medevac to for
Right.
those urgent surgical patients and immediate patients. And um, I think the medical folks see the worst of the war because they're trying to help and fix these folks and stabilize them. And she shared with me that, you know, people would say things like to her too, like, don't, I can't die, or please let me live. And it's just such tough stuff. And I remember thinking about it downrange, thinking, one day, I don't know when, one day I'm going to write a book, or I'm going to go and interview people that were in the medical realm
Mm-hmm.
and get their stories,
Yeah.
because it's enough to know about the stories from combat with, you know, in the combat arms. It's another to capture from the actual medical staff and the medical peeps that are trying, you know, to do this and to trying to save. So I went through a lot of nostalgia when I came back home, and I would watch footage from like Iraq and other parts of Afghanistan from combat support hospitals and or FSTs that were kind of sprinkled in there. And it was like you wanted to experience that all over again,
Mm-hmm.
because you it's both anxiety provoking, but it was like wanting to cry. I don't know what it was, but I would just watch these damn videos and just cry and think,
Would you say it's
you
like a
know,
flood of emotions?
oh, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have the other part of it where, you know, you're in a combat zone. And of course, you know, you always have leaders who are more in tuned of which vehicle the other commander has,
Yeah.
and why don't I have a Chevy, you know, why don't I have a Chevy Suburban? I got this Toyota Land Cruiser, and I'm like, you know,
Y'all complain about the
that
wrong stuff.
I was, you know, so I did just go through the full gamut of, wow, we're in a combat zone, and this is what we're talking about. Like,
Yeah.
I used to laugh when we used to have command and staff. I mean, seriously, I would just laugh sometimes, like, I can't believe, I mean, not to say we'd have a meeting of, you know, meeting of the minds and stuff, but like, we're setting agendas and doing PowerPoint presentations. I was just like, oh my gosh, rolling my eyes. And meanwhile, I'm just trying to survive and not struggle with anxiety. You
Right.
know? I
Right.
remember just having so much high anxiety over there, and not knowing what the day would bring, let alone like how the leadership was and the pettiness. And then the Jerry Springer show that already exists, a lot of it is in the medical realm because we're just medical. We like to um, interact a little bit too much with people.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? And I was just like, I had so many competing requirements in my own mind. Like, what if I get hit by an IED? My kids will never see, you know what I mean? Like those little things. You try not to think about that, but you just can't help
Yeah.
sometimes. And, um, but, but my faith is really what kept me together over there. I learned a lot about Janine and a lot about what my priorities are and what I want to do with my life and what's the meaning of life. Like, I know we want to make money. To me, I'm like, well, I want to help people. I want to help people. I want to use some of my struggles that I've been able to overcome and help people. And I remember going through the program, the social work program, and learning about cognitive behavioral therapy
Hmm.
and thinking, oh my gosh, like I was doing that on myself and I didn't even know it. Because, you know, because when you're a person that truly wants to better yourself, you'll do it. You'll find the motivation from somewhere, even though
Right.
it wasn't always there. But once you get there, you're like, okay, I can't do this. I can't be this way. I've got children to raise. I can't continue on this cycle. So
But at least you recognize you were in a cycle.
yeah, but it was an unhealthy cycle.
Hmm.
It was affecting other people in my life, and I also couldn't, like, I was still trying to resolve some things that were unresolved in my spirit and
Yeah.
in my soul that made me maybe mean and numb, not wanting to interact with people and saying, fuck you. I get to choose who's in my circle, and you are definitely not one of them
Right.
because, you know, because of X, Y, and Z. And it wasn't in a judgy sense. It was just like I couldn't compromise my anxiety. Like if I felt like anxious to be around you, I'm not going to be around you. But why can't I go to you and say why I'm anxious and not get hyped up? I had
True.
to learn how to do that.
Yeah.
Wasn't always like having conversations. Certain people, yes, but like family, that was hard because you know there's some history there and there's some things that happened, and I had to learn how I needed to let go of those things because it was only affecting me. They were they were occupying rent up in my brain and they had no clue.
Right.
And so I had to learn all these things so that I could say, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore for my own mental health. And I realized that was a very vulnerable time for me because I was still not sure who Janine really, really, really was. I mean, I was a grown woman, I was a mother, but I also was still trying to appease people. You know, and you take all those damn personality tests. I already knew I was a people pleaser. And then I was Dr. Kevin Lehman. He writes books on birth order with siblings.
Right.
And oh my gosh, I was textbook middle child deal.
Isn't it funny
You know?
how in when you learn about, well, for me, when I learned about therapy, you learn like you ask questions like, your parents' background. You ask, what order were you born in. People don't realize that you almost fit exactly in the pegs that we've studied from that guy. Like
Hmm.
if you're a middle child, you're gonna be this type, and it's amazing how that works. So let's go
No,
back to you're finished with Afghanistan. Are you
hmm,
off active duty now? Back in
no,
reserves? No, you're
no.
still active duty.
So when I was brought back on active duty, yeah, I was recommissioned. I had
Mm-hmm.
to do another oath of office. It was weird. So I was actually on active duty, active duty. Like the plan was to just retire, do 20 years active federal service and retire and have those bonus years as a reservist as bonus years,
Right.
They still counted because I still had to get the right amount of points, but
Mm-hmm.
no, I went back to 44th Medical Brigade and um, Rick got an assignment up in Northern Virginia. And so I was able to move up to Northern Virginia with him. And I went to Office of the Surgeon General. And I actually loved the idea of going there because when I was deployed,
Mm-hmm.
and I was, we're talking about the veterans who are trying to document to get their VA compensation, right? I
Mm-hmm.
remember being in Afghanistan and those forward surgical teams they weren't always the best at doing the electronic stuff. And I don't blame them because they're in a remote location,
Sure.
they've got fast paced environment. So they did everything on paper, but the problem was is they put the paper in boxes and let like 20 or so boxes pile up to the point where they ran out of wood, and so they were burning the damn paper in their burn pit to
Oh,
stay warm
jeez.
during the winter.
Yeah.
And I about had a damn heart attack. I was like, and so I initiated this policy because we had freaking policies over there going out the yin yang, and it was the loose leaf documentation policy. So I wanted to travel to those forward surgical teams every time they rotated out because nobody knew what these boxes of paper until like I got a call and they're like, some awesome medic was like, hey, I was looking through these boxes and there's like mace tests. These are tests that like initial explosion, like
Oh.
you do a mace test, like when you've been exposed to some sort of explosion, which is going to be helpful when you're trying to do your TBI claim and,
Mm-hmm.
on and on. And so I reached back to Fort Sam. They have a data system that, and I said, hey, how can I get all these documents from Afghanistan and send them to you so you guys can scan them into the system for these different people? And so we were able to get like an NSN number for a box, the secure boxes,
Yeah.
those heavy duty ones to send everything back. But it was such a process. Like I had to talk to these FSD commanders and say, look, I know this, you're out there, they rotate in and out every 6 months because their assignment time is so heavy when you're seeing so much stuff like that. And
Yeah.
I said, look, these documents belong to somebody who one day wants to file a claim, and the only documentation they have is this piece of paper because it doesn't reach back like they say it does in the systems.
Right.
And I had to kind of convey it like that, like, what if your son or daughter or, was trying to get their VA claim from them getting blown up, but all they had was just this mace test.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know how it went after I left, but we at least got some of those boxes back to PASPA to get in the system. And I was mad because you go to the regulation and you'd see that the regulation wasn't updated. So when I went to OTSG, my goal was to update the regulation for medical records administration
Yeah.
to how do you do it loose leaf documentation. You send the shit back and here's the address and here's the NSN number to get the boxes to officially. Because I remember one of the administrators, he'd send me pictures of how the boxes arrived, like regular boxes, and it was like trashed. Like, so that's why we had to get those heavy duty ones that could withstand like all kinds of stuff. So that meant something to me. It really did, because I thought about, like, what if it was my stuff?
Definitely.
And, so I went there, though, all motivated, and I was quickly disheartened because of the bureaucracy. I was not prepared for that. I was becoming disgruntled. I mean, because it was like, you're dealing with these agencies that are supposed to have people they're designed to help you, but it was just like, it was disheartening. And it was, like, you'd spend 1 week of your life doing it the way they said on the edits, because I've never written or I've never done this kind of job. And the next person you talk to, not the same person, would tell you, oh, you weren't supposed to do that. And I was like, well, shit, I just lost a week of my life then.
Right.
I guess I'll never get that shit back. And it was just so freaking disappointing. But
no wonder stuff don't work when you get out, and it's like, I don't know, just it makes it for a stressful time when you get out of the military for stuff like that.
I realized, though, I mean, and I do believe that they updated stuff, but I had left that job and then went over to work with the Integrated Disability Evaluation System and the medical boards. And I learned a lot. I was really a fish out of water. I didn't realize what I was getting myself into, but I was grateful because I did learn a lot. And I did learn that we call it the major mafia. Like, I was a major when I went up there, and all of these directorates had these colonels in charge, and the personalities, if some of them didn't get along or whatever, we, the majors, made sure, because we were all either the XOs or the action officers or whatever, we always made sure that we worked together to make shit happen.
That's good.
And but that job was draining. I mean, the commute, everything, and again, still learning about myself. I actually, by then, I was talking about always going and seeking behavioral health. By then the stigma wasn't as bad,
Right.
but I was still kind of like, hey, I'll see y'all later. I'm going to my mental health appointment, so I won't kill people. And made a joke about it, but that's really how I felt, because I was like, OMG, like, I can't do this. So, but I went to OTSG and I did that. And the turning point again, like, was the kids were in middle school, very awkward time for people, young people, right? And so I remember my daughter was performing in this recital, and the kids were such troopers, though. Like, Ricky and I would plan meals, and we'd put them in the fridge, and then we'd call, and it was like an hour commute for each one of us. So we'd call the kids, who did have some supervision from the neighbors, but they were truly latchkey kids. And I remember calling them and saying, okay, turn the oven on to this degrees and put this on the timer. And they put it in there, and they felt a sense of duty too. so that at least when we got home, dinner was ready and we would sit down and eat as a family. That was so important to me.
Yeah.
It was an everyday battle every day. And I used to define that as success, though. So I later learned that no, our kids are loved and they're seeing a mom and a dad work. And that's how they should see us. But they, we work hard, but we love harder, and we work together as a team and they help us and we, and so I love to sit down and eat dinner together as a family, but I don't let that check mark be there anymore because it was just like my own. I realize that my kids still have the value of knowing the concept of eating as a family, but
Right.
we didn't always eat as a family.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I was kind of easier on myself about that. But I didn't go to the recital. I did end up going to the recital late. But when I saw my daughter's face when I came into the room, because she was so sad, and then she saw me and she perked up, but then she was sad. But it just tore me up. So
I can only imagine she's thinking, "Mom's here, but she's late." Just
yeah.
Yeah.
But that's when I went home and I told Ricky for the second time. I was like, Rick, I'm done fucking working.
Yeah.
Shit's too hard. We're paying off some bills. And in the next year, I popped smoke again.
Uh-huh.
I came back out of the reserve. I did my initial, I think I needed to do 3 years, my initial 3 years before I could get out of whatever commitment. I had done 5. So I was like, all right, I'm done.
And so you did an additional 5 years active duty time? Wow.
Mm-hmm. And I remember when I put in my packet to get out, it was denied. And I was pissed. I was like, what? Because all these people were getting their pink slips. This was back in 2013, 2014, where they were doing a RIF and kicking people out. And I get denied because I owe $600 on my freaking tuition assistance. Because I had gotten my master's at UMUC. I was pissed off, man. And I was like, well, can I pay $600? But then I had to submit for a waiver, and it was just the most bizarre thing. So I ended up speaking to some of the senior leadership for their assistance.
Wow.
And they did help me, because I told them I'm getting out because of family, because I'm the mom.
Yeah.
And I was talking with nothing but men. So they were like, well, can't argue with that, because, their spouses are the reasons why they say, well, I'm only here because of my wife and her keeping the home front. So I was like, well, see, there you go.
Yeah.
Now you know.
Wow.
And that's
so. What year did you arrive in San Antonio?
2016.
Okay. And you came here because Rick was assigned duty station? Okay. So what, 2016. Wait, when did we meet? 19. No. 20? It's all blur.
No. We met
March 2020, right?
Okay. March 2020 was when COVID hit. So it was later that year.
Yeah, I think it was
maybe
October.
John asked me to. I graduated in December of 2019 with my master's in social work. I was supposed to test in March, but then COVID hit. And so in May, John asked me to come and work with him as like a case manager. And I was like, well, might as well. I felt like that, I think the casework is the grunt work of social work.
Right.
I think you need to know
Yeah.
You just need no case management. And so,
So you were in San
I,
Antonio for 5 years
mm, yeah,
before you
we
moved
moved
back
in
up north.
20. Mm-hmm.
Pretty long time. So,
Yep.
so you went to school. You got your master's in clinical social work, right?
Well, it's master's just in social work. And
Okay.
so then you do your clinical hours just like you do as LPCI,
Mm-hmm.
you get your 3,000 hours. And so I'm doing that currently
Okay.
from here,
How many more hours do you
thankfully.
have left?
I have one more year
Okay.
and I'm not, I, I used to think, oh man, as soon as I get my LMSW, I'm going to go for my clinicals right away.
Yeah.
Well, I realized I was like, I don't know if that's the smartest thing to do realistically. I mean, time is time along with interactions is something you should do. Um, I'm in a group setting with other aspiring clinicians, and I love hearing about their backgrounds and their stories because they're doing stuff that I'm not necessarily interested in, like hospice care.
Oh yeah. I couldn't
Um,
do that either.
I've done medical social work, and I know that's just maybe not my thing, unless it's in the psych ward, which I had the privilege of being able to work within the psych ward, not all the time, but and then I learned a lot about trauma at University Hospital when I worked in the trauma clinic
Mm-hmm.
and doing you just doing some simple screenings, the 5-question screenings that you do just to be able to refer them to an additional resource if they choose,
Yeah.
and and I don't know about you, but sometimes I'll read some of these assessments or these tests and
Mm-hmm.
I'll be analyzing myself like, am I am I really? I don't know. Like,
You shouldn't do that.
secretly I'd be like,
Yeah.
but then I'm cool, like I was like, well, it's good to learn about yourself even at this age, whatever. But um
So going back to, you're still volunteering. Do you think I could say where we worked? Is that safe to do?
I don't think it's a problem.
Okay,
Yeah, I
so we
still.
worked at a homeless shelter in Bear County called Haven for Hope.
Hmm.
And I didn't think you guys were gonna hire me. First of all, I don't have a degree in social work. I have a degree in psychology. My master's is in counseling.
Hmm.
And then on top of that, I couldn't find where y'all were at, and I was an hour early. I was like, I kind of went into the interview like, they're not gonna hire me. I don't have social work experience. I have counseling experience. I just came from a juvenile facility where I was a counselor there. I did all my intern hours, uh, counseling. So I was like, I don't have any social work. And did the interview, and I walked out of that place like, there is no way. I was really dead honest with my answers that y'all were asking me.
Well, and let me tell you a story let me tell everybody about my first interactions with him, with my interviewer. Um, I had a friend interviewing for that position
Hmm.
that I personally recommended to John. And I was like, it's not my decision, but I'm all about business. I don't do that. Hey, hook up a sister or a brother unless your ass can bring it.
Right,
Like I
right.
ain't putting my reputation on the line for you, unless you can bring it. And so of course, my opinion was, well, if I've got to vote, it's for her, right? But then when we interacted with you, I think that was the thing that I was like, okay, mad respect because you were being honest and you were you're in a vulnerable situation, which I recognize that you don't do too well in, but that's okay because a lot of people don't either. And I was like, okay, well, I've got a ton of respect and I believe in diversity. I think that you shouldn't have all of the same clinician. Like I'll be honest, I've learned so much from my LPC friends and have a lot of respect, and I welcome that. And I really am secure with myself to be able to say that, because I only deal with people that aren't going to put on a front, or, that, what was that, imposter syndrome? Like, it's kind of easy to see that, right? So I have a brother-in-law that's a PsyD, so I like different aspects. And so I think it's good to have different qualities and backgrounds like that in order to maximize for that population, which is our homeless veterans. To me, it's like they deserve that. They deserve. And it's nice when you can interact with a colleague and debate or do whatever, and it's still nothing personal. It's for the client. And so after all of the interviews, I mean, I was like, I've changed my mind, because I just liked how real you were. I think it was refreshing, because you know how when you're in an interview and you're asked these questions and you want to tell them what you want to hear. I'm the complete opposite. I want you to just be like, well, shit, I don't know. I mean, and so that's what kind of I was like, oh, well, I think, and I think it was the greatest decision. And even to this day, I felt like we were the Fab Four. Like all of us, we did what we had to do, but we still would regroup and debrief. And I think that's important as a team, because if you can talk about it and get it out, I'm a big fan of talk therapy. I know a lot of people aren't in the social world, but
one thing we had as a team, by the way, we had one of the greatest teams I've ever been on. Mm-hmm. One of the greatest. And we talked so much about our clients. The clients couldn't get past us, because they thought just because you're their case manager, they could come to me about something, but didn't know we already done talked about your situation. Mm-hmm. And then if we were frustrated, it'd be like, lunch. Let's do lunch. Mm-hmm. And we would just sit at the table and talk. And our boss John, man, he could take our frustrations and turn it around and be like, do whatever you need to do. He gave us free reign, like, to just be us. Mm-hmm. And they really got their money's worth out of us. We put in a lot of time, a lot of hours. We did way more than we were supposed to. Mm-hmm. And so that's definitely, lunch was one of my favorite times, not because I love to eat, but because man, we talked like viciously sometimes. But
well, I think it's also the mutual respect that we have for each other, and knowing that we could voice our opinions and wouldn't necessarily be like written off forever,
trust.
just because we didn't agree upon things. And I know I took on more of a motherly role, because I was just like that. But I felt like I knew it was great, because we didn't necessarily look at the time. The standard wasn't to time. It was to following through for that person or people, like anybody that we were dealing with. And it was a natural thing. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to show you that I care for you. No, we showed in our actions.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit there and stroke anybody's ego, or, or let the veteran tell me any kind of crap. Mm-hmm. because you know, to me, it was tough love. They knew that we cared. And I think, you know, with us though, we did have periods of time where we were tapped out, and we
Yeah.
recognized that in each other and said, okay, I'm going to take on, we flexed a lot,
Yeah,
you
we
know,
did.
because when I knew you or John or the other John, you know, whenever, and y'all knew when I was too. And so you kind of said, okay, I'm going to take that over. And
Yeah.
we weren't like, oh, those are your clients. I'm not,
Right.
no, it was never like that. And that's where I felt like this was good, but it was heavy. It was heavy.
Yeah.
And I'm open with my husband and my friends about how much more I drank.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, of course, Rick was geographically at Fort Bragg or in DC.
Yeah.
And I stayed there and committed to my kids, because remember, I went to 4 different high schools. I didn't want that for my kids.
Yeah, I remember.
And I stayed at Fort Sam for them to be able to go to one high school.
Yeah.
And it was a hard decision, but it was the best decision for them.
Yeah.
And so I drank, though, to cope. And I realized that that was not healthy.
Yeah.
It was not healthy. And Ricky's saying hi.
Hey, Ricky.
He just got home. Captain America just
Don't
got
worry,
home.
we're gonna have him on here eventually.
Yeah. I don't know. He may be a little gun shy because, you know, of his position.
Well, he's
but
still in, so like, I know for myself, I was I worked with some people like him, and until they get out, I can't even mention their names.
Oh no,
So,
Ricky's not like that.
oh,
But
okay.
you know, like no. It's just like he's, you know, doing his brigade command, and it's not a traditional command that he's used to. And I'm loving it because I think it's good training when you're dealing with civilians and
Yeah.
dealing with unions. But that's the medical field for you. But you know, I think he's
You guys treated me really good though, because I wasn't even a case manager. I was hired on as a navigator, but y'all still gave me a caseload, and you. I don't know. I just felt totally respected. It was pretty cool that John had to tell us, "Go home, you guys. Already go home." You know, he'd had to. Some nights he would have to pry us out of the office, but I really, you know, you guys are some of the only ones that where if you called me for a startup job or something like that, I know y'all's work ethics, and I know, I if I could be there, I would be there.
yeah.
And there's not many people I can say at my age that I could really be that trusting of people like that, and that's like, it was a great time. It was like. I don't remember. I remember the frustrating parts, but now they're just kind of funny if you think about the things, the stories we heard from people, and the things we had to deal with, and just telling people to take a shower. You know.
Right. It's yeah. Oh yeah. But I think that's the thing about, and all good things come to an end, right?
Yeah.
Come and say hi. It's Thomas. Remember I told you I was going to be interviewed. I'm the first person he wants to interview. There
Oh
you
man,
go.
look what you got in your hand. What is going on with that?
Oop. Where's your
Fat tire? You must have got that.
He's got to show you his fat
Fell in love with that in Colorado, huh?
Post-workout shit.
And speaking of which, go get me a Truly or something, please.
Oh, I thought you were doing your
I can drink while we talk. We should
Man,
drink.
yeah, you could drink. You're watching your carbs with a Truly.
Yeah. Those are
How's San
kind of,
Antonio?
Hey.
he said, how's San Antonio? I'm sorry. Did you
Oh
hear
man,
it?
it's we're looking to move further south.
Further south, really?
Yeah,
Where
so
at? Charlotte?
huh?
Not that.
No, not
south.
that. No, like an hour south between here and Corpus.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
When that happens, I'll let y'all know because we're gonna need y'all to come, you know, shoot some hogs and some deer out there.
We can, he's not much of a hunter and gatherer.
That's right.
But
I put Bin Laden's face on
for
it or something.
entertainment, I've heard the hogs are pretty bad, like in Texas, how aggressive they are and stuff. So
Yeah.
but I'll go. I will go.
Well, when that happens, I'll let y'all know.
Yeah, well, I remember you mentioning that you and Shimon kind of got some property. I think it's smart. I was hoping that, things would slow down a little bit so we could try to get some land, but I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I don't know. And so we're not, we know we're coming back to San Antonio. It's just like where.
So,
and if he gets, go ahead.
One last thing about the job is when my stupid butt ass ended up in the hospital. I remember I was at work and I was helping a client with some oxygen tanks, and the doctor had been trying to call me, but when we were busy, I didn't pick up the phone. My wife had called because the doctor called her. And get back to the office, and I think only John was there at the time. And I told him, I was like, "Hey, the doc said I need to go to the hospital," and he just dropped what he did, dropped me off at the hospital, and then you guys were there visiting me like the next day, and that was pretty awesome. I was like, "Well, yeah," and it was hard because I made the decision to quit because I was like, I needed to, I was taking care of everybody else, I was taking care of our clients and. I needed to take care of myself, so I quit, and y'all were like, we kind of knew you were gonna do it.
Well, I think it was understanding that there's a selfish part. There's like, well, we want you to stay, but we also know what's going on, and we support that more because self-care and taking care of yourself is more of a priority. And it's never to say that it will never have the team that we had, because I'm branching off into some endeavors, and I'm looking to be with people I know I can trust and count on, even when we have to have hard conversations like, no, I can't help you with that, or what. That's what I need. I don't need this, oh sure, no problem, and then bam, I feel like it's okay to say that you can't do it and feel sad about like not being able to, but hey, at least it's real, and you can say that, and it's not like going to be held against you or anything. Because I know that John would have you back in a heartbeat. He would, and it has everything to do with just a mutual respect, and you once in a lifetime you can have that. I believe, like, it's nothing personal, and you have to make your own decisions for you. And the people that mean the most are the ones that aren't going to hold that against you, and still, but that's just my approach to it. It's nothing personal. You have to do you. I'm the type where I like to still stay in touch. Doesn't have to be all the time. It can be once every 6 months, but I feel like that's the kind of friends that I have. I don't have friends that are high maintenance. I mean, I truly have been blessed with great friends that, most military, but not all, that are cool with not talking to me but once a year. But it's like we left off where we started where we left off. And so that's the kind of stuff that I have. Hold on one second. I'm going to close her.
Okay.
But, that's not to say we can't have it again. And, I'm really grateful to have met you and John, because it's nice to see veterans taking care of veterans and really just being passionate about it and not beating your chest and saying, look what I'm doing. And, you know, and you have that. It's just, it's human nature, right? People want to be recognized, and the affirmation is there, right?
Well, I know none of us walked around there like you didn't walk around like you could have been that type of person. I'm a lieutenant colonel, and you know, and and Little John could have been like, I got a Purple Heart, and Big John could have been like, well, I've had my master's degree for I don't know how many years, and let me tell you how to invest. And
I
all this
served
stuff.
in the Philippines.
I mean, his stories were cool. I'm gonna have to interview him, um, but none of us walked around like we were the shit, like our shit didn't stink. And there's a person there that I'm not gonna mention his name, which was the worst type of veteran that I don't like, and I think you know who I'm talking about. But you know, just it was funny because during that little vacuum of time we had together as a team, we all knew like inherently what our real job was, and that was to the people we were serving, to the veterans, you know. So I really like. I always look back at that time, and be like, okay, that's one of the most. I learned so much in therapy. There, I learned so much about counseling. I learned so much about social work. I learned from like watching Big John, like how you get things done. You know, networking and all that. And I learned from you like how to be tough without hurting feelings, because that's a hard thing to do for me, because I can be tough, but when I am, sometimes I do it the wrong way. And
But I think we all innately, I guess okay, so like you mentioned, oh, she's a lieutenant colonel. I think I felt more pressure that people judged me by that instead of separating that, because to me, I don't feel like that has anything to do with my service as a social worker.
right,
Do you know what I'm saying?
it doesn't. Yeah,
So
true.
when I'm judged and I'm put on this standard because of that, it it's not cool.
Yeah.
You know, and I had to kind of defend myself with, you know, who, and it was like, so you're judging me on something that I did or do occasionally. And I looked at it as, well, that's your problem, not mine.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a social worker. I'm now a social worker, and I'm not afraid to say I don't know it all.
Right.
But I know that people in my realm who like to put, you know, that judgment on me, they're the ones with the issue. Like, I guess I'm sorry, there's lieutenant colonels are a freaking dime a dozen. Whoop-de-doo. And that's why my response is like, okay, and like, what does that have to do with my work as a social worker?
Yeah.
Maybe the only thing is I can endure bullshit like you wouldn't believe. I mean, yeah, that's one avenue, but it's not who I am. It's what I did.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like a respect and a integral part is, I think about like, what if I was that homeless person? How would I want my social worker, my therapist to work with me?
Yeah.
You know, I think about my son who has special needs, and if I would have given up on him because it was too hard, you know, like that was never an option for me. So I feel like that's a duty, but you know, there's people, I realized Thomas, that there's people out there, and the good thing is now I recognize their issue, but they project it on me. Like, I realize that there's going to be haters. Haters are going to hate, and you're what you're doing for the community. It could be for just your community. It could be for your employment. What you're doing and how well you're doing, other people are going to be like, well, I should be,
Yeah.
It's like they're going to hate, they're going to be jealous, because it's like the ideas that you may have, the thought that you're doing, the things you're doing, and this blows up for you.
Right.
I'm cheering you on, dude, because I know myself, I know my heart, I know who I am. I'm going to be all in and all supportive for you. And that's what I choose, to put people around me like that. But you can recognize those haters.
Yeah.
And
Can
that's
I tell you a secret?
Sure.
For the last 5 years maybe, I've actually been able to have joy from living vicariously through my friends.
Mm-hmm.
So my best friend, he retired from the Air Force and was like, what am I going to do as a civilian? He kept landing these great jobs, and then he went off, got his master's degree, and then he kept getting these better jobs. And I was like, man, I thought it was great. But what he gave me back, he was one of the ones that influenced me to finish my education. So I didn't get my bachelor's degree till 2019. I've been going to school nonstop from 2005 to 2019 because I couldn't decide what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was one of the ones like, dude, do your master's. So I finished my bachelor's, and then the next session available, I went and did my master's. And then just knowing the accomplishments that you and both Johns have had, even though I didn't know you guys till later in life, all your accomplishments that you've had that I've learned about, it brings me more joy, because I'm like, well, I might not have had a piece of that, but I have a piece of any success you have from here on out, because I really believe that we had positive influences on each other.
Sure.
So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And because you are, like, I would look, just like when you're in the military, you look for mentorship, right?
Right.
And I realized, and I look back and I think, man, the most secure people who they knew themselves, right? They didn't have a mean streak in them or whatever, and they took you under your wing and they taught you.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most important lessons I learned. And to me, it's my faith. Like, when even I learned later in life, like way later in life, even blessing your enemies and the ones that do bring that malice, who have that malice intent, and still blessing them and saying, you know what? God sees my heart. Mm-hmm. He knows me. So, like, whenever I'm in a situation, even when I met you or anything, I'm always like, okay, I remember those moments in the military where I wasn't given the time of day.
Right.
But then it took that one or two people that kind of took me under their wing, and I benefited so tremendously from that I said, I have to do that. And even those that are ugly, and maybe you can witness and show them and be the change for them.
True.
But when you find that mentorship, and now for me as a social worker, I love that we're friends, that we can collaborate, and I can run things by you, and I'm not going to be judged, or it's going to be like, okay, Janine, I think that's a little outlandish, but but it's and knowing I'm not going to take it personal, but it'll be like, maybe you're right. And that's what we as clinicians can choose,
Yeah.
we can have our inner circle, and even not even being clinicians, like talking to John about something and asking his opinion, because it's coming from a good place.
Right. Yeah.
But you know how they say is, when you have good ideas, be careful who you share them with, because they want to stomp your dreams. And I'm grateful that I've learned how to decipher from those people,
Yep.
or when I meet a new person, and this is a funny example, but this, it's like interacting with military spouses, right?
Right.
And you can tell that they're so in tune with what keeping up with the Joneses, or keeping up, and well, I know General so-and-so's wife, and her and I are besties, and I'm like, I particularly want to witness to those kind of women, because they're not quite comfortable in their skin yet, that they can just be themselves.
Yeah.
And it makes me so sad to encounter them. I don't get sad. I get happy, because then they'll find out, like, who Rick is, for example. Like, around here, it's very small. So, no, my husband's not associated with the War College, which everybody's like, oh, wow, and no, he's actual brigade commander, and some of these colonels never got command or brigade command. But then they'll find out where he commands, and they're like, oh, it's like, what? But she's wearing a sweatshirt, and she's in the commissary with a bun in her hair, and she's not dressed to the nines. I'm like, yeah, and like, and by the way, I'm my own self too.
Right. When it was funny, when Shimon and I got married, and I was already a veteran, and I became a dependopotamus. I remember being in Colorado Springs, where she was at Peterson, and they asked me to be part of the family support group, and I was like, I can't do it. I can't, because yes, I'm a spouse.
I think it would have been fun for you, because you would have been that unusual person that they don't see.
Yeah.
And you could have changed things.
I'm also a veteran. I'm like, no, I can't. I can't play that role. I probably could now, because I'm able to swallow my pride now and actually be like, I could have helped. I could have brought them a different perspective. But at the time, I was like, oh, heck no, I'm not hanging around with all the... Because she was the lowest ranking person, and everybody is like Space Command, so you have freaking generals galore, and I didn't want to deal with those spouses. I'm sorry.
Well, the Air Force is a lot better about kind of stuff like that. Not always, but compared to the Army, I'm just going to say I've interacted with Air Force uppity-ups, and it's like they're not even consumed with that, like the Army is. Because, we're so consumed with, well, what's your background? Where'd you go? And, and I don't... I mean, it still exists, don't get me wrong. I remember I was so shocked. Like, I was at San Antonio Airport, I think it was. And this was back when we traveled in uniform, or I guess, but I saw this Air Force general, 1 star, in line. And he was flying in coach.
Oh, wow.
And I was so impressed with that. I was like, wow, like, this is a humble guy. I really love humble people. I mean, like, I just adore them, and I emulate them. I want to be, like them. I feel like we're servants. We're here, and it's more important for me to do good on this earth, so I have something to look forward to in heaven. Maybe I'll live in like a gold palace. I don't know, but maybe God will see how much I've tried to be a servant here, you know, and have some humble pie. And I've had a lot of humble pie, and that's why I feel like, okay, this is the way to go. But
Yeah.
the real quick story,
Okay.
squirrel shiny moment. I remember when Rick and I were in company command together,
Mm-hmm.
it was crazy with young toddlers
Oh, y'all were company commanders at the same time.
at the same
Okay.
time.
Okay.
And I remember thinking, okay, well, if I'm going to be his FRG leader, he's sure as hell going to be my FRG leader,
Yeah.
right? Like, why is it just put on the chick, you know? And so
Yeah.
I remember him, you know, and Ricky, let me tell you, you know, Ricky he was very socially awkward back then. Like, he's still a little social awkward now.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine? Like, it
Back
was
then.
like, oh,
Yeah.
awkward. And I remember forcing the function. I was like, no, I'm not going to do shit with your FRG unless you do shit with mine.
Mm-hmm.
It's only fair. And so he did step up, you know, and I wanted to be humorous about it, you know. So like for my change of command, I knew he was not into flowers or, you know, that kind of shit. But I was like, no, this is important. I think we need to be the example as a dual military couple to say it can work. It's hard, but you can do it. And so I thought, okay, I'll get a dozen Krispy Kreme donuts and put a red bow on it
Okay.
as a dozen red, you know, dozen red roses. And I remember getting all these compliments from like these senior leaders that were like, that's pretty damn squared away. You know, and going up to Ricky, because of course he was Mr. Cool Guy with his Ranger Squirrel and
Get some.
being his second Ranger Battalion. And I was like, hey, that's right. I mean, you got to be unusual. You got to stand out in a positive way
Mm-hmm.
and break the ice, you know, for people who would normally do something like that, but they're like, oh, you know, I don't know about that. I mean, I feel like you can get so much out of soldiers by showing who you really are and not fitting this mold
Yeah.
of, oh, you're an officer, you're supposed to be this way, or you're a senior NCO, you're supposed to be this way.
Yeah.
You just be personable and make a difference, you know, and that's what I like to do in my life. So,
That's good leadership.
well, you know, you try. You don't want to be the leaders that you wish you had,
Yeah.
right? Because we all had some shitty leaders.
Yeah.
But maybe one of these other days we'll talk about if you want, like, Afghanistan, dealing with the Afghan
Yeah.
population.
Yeah. I think we'll
And
do
like,
that on the next episode because I have a lot of questions about that and
oh man,
but
I got a lot of comments about it. Like, you know, like processing shit. Like,
yeah.
is it normal to feel this way?
Well, I think that'll be a good conversation for other people to watch because you can't be the only one.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because we've been over there
Oh my
for
gosh.
what, 20 years? So.
Well, I will tell you, little trailer to the next.
Okay.
It was like, you know, they wanted to ask, but they didn't really ask. So I brought it up and I said, yeah, you know, I just hope that, you know, I did see some very beautiful events. And, you know, the Terps in particular, you know, who spoke perfect English.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, it was beautiful to see the interpreters who are so grateful to be here and running from the Taliban and just thankful that they're not living looking over their shoulder. But then, you know, there's others that you're not sure about their intentions. And yes, we had to report them to the Department of Homeland Security because there were some behaviors. And it's our duty to report that.
Yeah.
Like, what if because I know their names. I know their names. What if they're on Channel 9 News? And this is something we could have prevented.
Yeah.
So, and they're like, yeah, it makes me wonder, like, are they going to blow us up in 10, 20 years? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. You just hope that they don't.
Right.
But but it's like reading their mind. The intuition is really, I'm big on intuition, and I feel like, so I'll bring it up, and I'm not always right in my intuition, but I feel like a good portion of it I am, and they're asking those questions. But you can tell that they feel bad about judging them.
Yeah.
And that's a valid reason, but it is something that goes through people's mind. And I'm willing to talk about it. I'm not willing to sit there and get all politically correct or the whole, I'm not even sure what exactly the woke culture is, but I just know that I'm not one to, I believe that we can have conversations about hard topics without it getting ugly.
Yeah.
Because it's just in the art of delivery.
Yeah.
And those things. So
that'd be good for, so for the next one we're going to reverse roles, and you're going to interview me. Because I want my people to know my history and everything as well. I just want to thank you for being my first warrior on this new kind of podcast I'm doing.
All right.
Any closing thoughts?
No, just like I said before, I'm really honored and I'm grateful and almost a little not embarrassed, but like, really? Like me? Like, just like we said yesterday, it's like, but okay, no big deal.
Why not you? If you think about it, we make up a tiny portion of the population. And then if you even go any further, being a woman in the military, even smaller part of the population, which also doesn't get representation either. So, yeah.
It's gotten better over the years, but I think it's more forced because of, like sending girls to ranger school and sapper school. And not to say they can't do it. It's just, it's the politics of it all, I guess.
Yeah. And the only problem I have with that is it would be so easy for me to think of them as my mom or sister that I would probably do some foolish stuff and put my life on the line when I really shouldn't to protect them. But besides that, I say, if you think you can do it, go do it. But
I know
that's a whole different podcast there too.
Yeah.
But I'll call you later so we can figure out a time when we can flip the script. And, but until then, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Same to you, brother.
Bye, Janine.
Keep it real.
I will.
Talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.